Well, I often look back at what I was doing exactly 1 year ago to get an idea for stories to follow up on, maybe advance. And I saw at this time 1 year ago I was doing an interview with Senator Marco Rubio in which he warned us something terrible was coming.
The day of reckoning will come.
Well, he wasn't talking about the pandemic back then. He was referring to an economic time bomb that could cripple our economy in ways that people even caught up in the grip of the pandemic can't imagine. An economic time bomb, something like a virus, could accelerate and detonate on its way out the door. And President Trump knew it.
We are sitting on a time bomb.
As a candidate in 2016, Trump said if we dare let our national debt hit $24 trillion, that would be the point of collapse.
I've always heard that $24 trillion, we become Greece.
And that's why Trump ran in 2016 on the promise of getting rid of our national debt and doing it within 8 years.
We pay it back so easily.
How?
It's easy to pay it back.
But instead of paying it back, the president and Congress ran it up so much more. Look at that staggering number. That's a $587 billion deficit. And that was the deficit in 2016 under former President Obama. Before the pandemic, President Trump's budget deficits nearly doubled Obama's in 2016. Instead of cutting spending in 2019, Trump cut a deal with Republicans and Democrats to escalate spending. Their plan was to suspend borrowing limits for 2 years to spend more than $1 trillion we don't have, while social insurance programs like Social Security and Medicare continue to spiral when we were already $22 trillion in debt at the time with no idea how to pay it back. Well, the president's own budget proposal projected a $24 trillion debt this year, and remember what the president said about a $24 trillion debt.
I've always heard that $24 trillion, we become Greece.
Now, here's what he means by if our debt hits $24 trillion, we become Greece. In Greece's debt crisis, taxes doubled, 1 in 4 lost their jobs, and banks closed, and more than 40% of the country plunged into poverty. Now, thankfully for Greece, it was bailed out by the European Union. Europe would not likely bail us out if, and more likely when, the time bomb hits us. Our government would have to print out much more money, devaluing the money we do have. It would diminish people's life savings while taxes and unemployment would likely soar. Before the pandemic, for the past 3 years, Trump and Congress ramped up the amount of money going out. And then they slashed taxes or the amount of money coming in. Then they ramped up the amount of money going out even more. Now, tax cuts do promote growth, but the Trump administration claimed their cuts would grow the economy so much that they would pay for themselves.
This will pay for itself with growth.
But conservative economists, like Reagan's former budget director David Stockman, said that is not going to happen.
There is no way you're going to cut the corporate tax by $2 trillion over the next 10 years and not pay for it.
But they kept saying it would. They kept saying 3% growth. And the president kept nudging the numbers up from 3%.
And we'll be up to 4 and even 5%.
I think you can go to 5 or 6%.
Well, a lot of economists and the CBO projected growth in the 2% range, while the president's budget proposals assume no recessions and at least 3% growth every year for a decade. And they acknowledged if they were off by just 1% in that it could be a time bomb in itself.
And the difference between 2% and 3% GDP is literally trillions of dollars.
And unfortunately, we know what happened next.
A decline of 32.9% for second quarter GDP.
And the CBO now projects our deficit this year to hit $3.3 trillion, which of course means our government's on track to spend $3.3 trillion more than it takes in just this year. And that's accelerating the debt beyond what the president said would trigger a collapse like we saw in Greece.
I've always heard that $24 trillion, we become Greece.
Well, the national debt clock now shows that debt has long crossed the president's projected point of collapse of $24 trillion to $26 trillion and rapidly counting. Now, to put that in perspective, the GDP, or gross domestic product, represents the total monetary value of all the stuff that we make or do. And our national debt is now on track to exceed our entire gross domestic product next year, meaning our debt will exceed the value of our entire economy. Now, our debt also reached GDP levels in the wake of World War II, but we recovered in part because Europe was in tatters and we rebuilt much of Europe from the ashes of war. This time, we ran up the debt in times of record prosperity. And then we got hit with a pandemic that cratered the economy and jolted the debt.
It's a terrible mistake. The day of reckoning will come.
Which brings us back now to Senator Rubio's warning this time last year, of course, before the pandemic.
As bad as the numbers look for future deficit spending, it's actually worse, because some of the things they say we're going to do to pay for it are never going to happen. You know, some of the cuts they talk about making over the next 10 years to pay for some of the spending are cuts that Congress isn't going to make. They're fake. It's a lie.
One obvious problem is that both sides have competing priorities and they wind up buying this in exchange for buying that. And the other problem is that the deficit and national debt don't really sell in the algorithms on social media. And social media tends to flood us with a bunch of other stuff that people may not remember or at least care that much about when that day of reckoning finally comes. We'll examine the proposals from both sides on how to deal with this in the coming weeks. And on Monday, we have a separate special on another pressing issue. Check out our investigation of forgotten heroes in the war at home Monday evening at 5:30. We investigate the plight of ailing vets, reveal more lapses in government response, and help veterans receive the benefits they earned. Then looking ahead, we'll dig back into the debt crisis with a closer look at what the candidates plan to do about it in the next round of Money, Power, and Politics.